Hey guys, welcome back to the Lit Mag Lab podcast. I'm Jazz Marie, aka Vevna Forrow. So, previously on the podcast, I was showing you around Ghost City Press, and I also took some time to share Ghost City Review. So, if you're curious, look back at that. Again, they had a really awesome micro chapbook summer series that I really wanted to just, show you guys. And yeah, so this is going to be another press episode, and as promised, right, since October is coming up, I was trying to choose one publication, series that or publication house, right, that focuses on horror writing, right. There are a lot of lit mags and journals and presses out there that are horror themed for sure, very cool ones, and yeah, so I was doing some digging and I saw quite a lot of positive comments on Grindhouse Press, yeah. So we're gonna take a look at it. Now, I couldn't find a chill subs listing for them as of today. However, I could always make a suggested listing. But yeah, they are listed, however, on Duotrope. So yeah, let me just share a little bit about them, and then we'll do a tour of their website as usual, right? Yeah. So it says here, and you can see my screen again, what I'm sharing on YouTube, Spotify, and some other platforms. Totally. Grindhouse Press, right? So they are a small press with the goal to publish 6 to 12 books a year with an emphasis on horror, extreme horror, transgressive fiction, sleaze, exploitation, dark humor, and general weirdness with dark themes. If you are interested in, submitting to Grindhouse, of course, they have their submission page. This is just again their duotrope overview page. So yeah, they have an online store, it looks like, right, which I'll show you guys here in a bit. And, the titles are available again wherever books, ebooks, and audiobooks are sold. So they were established, it looks like, in 2010, right? And they're based out of the US. Let's head over to their website. So, yeah. So this is Grindhouse Press's website. And, I went to the About section earlier, but yeah. So that's basically equivalent to what was on Duotrope. I was just double checking for you guys. And yeah, so they have an announcement section. They even have suggested Halloween reads, which is awesome. And I was just looking through, their post here. So they totally are supportive of authors. They have happy publication day post. They also, try to help authors out, and writers, right, that they published, right, and as much as possible, totally. Very supportive press. So let's check their submission page, right? So they're closed for submissions as of September 2025, it looks like here. And yeah, so you always have to, circle back, the places you're interested in submitting to. Yeah, but I'm going to still read the guidelines for you guys and things like that. And yeah, so it says here, so manuscripts submitted when they're closed, to submit, they will be automatically deleted with no response, and they will block your emails. So don't do that, guys. Be mindful about that with any lit mag journal press, right? If they're closed, right, don't send them things, right? Don't. Now, some places have, like a help desk email or general separate email, totally. But yeah, don't bombard, lit mags, journals, or presses with submissions when they're closed, or those who aren't using, submission management system, or just have, an email address, right, to intake submissions. Don't do that. Yeah, I see that a lot too with the lit mag and journal and press I run. Just the other day, I got an email saying, yeah, but that they were interested in, having their manuscript, right, published, but that's not how it works, right? You don't, send it through that way, right? We clearly specify, right, and a lot of lit management presses do this, right, how we intake submissions when the calls only are open, right? You can't do that, right? They have to go through the same way as everyone else, right, for our calls, right? Yeah. um so yeah, it says, check back for updates. Life happens and plans change, right? With calls and things like that, of course. Again, inquiring about submissions while they're closed frustrates the editor, it states, right? Again, you don't want to overwhelm inboxes, right? And things like that at all, right? So it says, if you're wondering if your manuscript is right, just read this entire submission page. So you just have to read very carefully. Yeah. Um, a lot of lit mags drone presses try to maintain an FAQ page, or, outline all of their guidelines to make it as clear as possible. So yeah, and so it says read this before going any further. So yeah, failure, of course, to not follow the guidelines will result in automatic rejection, and the editor will not open or of course, go through your manuscript. So it says before submitting, of course, take the time to familiarize yourself with their books, including the covers, interiors, and content. It says here, if you don't like their covers, the fonts or layouts they have, then, it's probably not going to, don't submit, right? It's not going to be a place, where they work with a few, it says here, in-house designers and a few approved artists. So, if their editors go through the process only for you to back out and say, oh, I don't like the design, I don't like the cover, right, then it's going to be very it's going to be very costly to the publisher, right? And we've totally had this happen with the sometimes with our series too at Dippity, right? So sometimes poets don't like their cover art, or sometimes others are totally understandable. We work with what we have, budget wise. So sometimes we're able to facilitate at Dippity, right, custom covers, and sometimes we can't. Sometimes we have artists who contribute work to us at a discounted rate and things like that, right? And sometimes we can't afford to make any further changes, and sometimes if we have room in the budget, totally, we can maybe do something more custom. I think it's so important, again, that the author is happy with the cover design and the layout and everything. But we do the best we can, and a lot of authors are totally understanding about that. But we want to make sure that of course, the cover matches the work as close as possible, right? So, sometimes if what I've done, if someone isn't happy with their cover art, right, we apply that maybe to a future publication down the road or something, to still use that artwork, right, that didn't suit maybe that particular collection, or, they were looking for something else. But you can't always do that, right? A lot of presses just, do a cover, right, and, sometimes you don't have that leeway of, oh, I want this changed, I want that changed, because, yeah, a lot of presses are on very tight budgets, so they don't really have that room for additional changes, because oftentimes artists may have additional fees for those changes, and it can be very costly to them. So yeah, they have a catalog of over 100 titles. And yeah, so they said if you don't like, of course, your book's appearance, right, then you may want to go self-publishing. Yeah, if you're going to self-publish a work, right, you have a say, in your cover art, the interior, everything, right, from start to finish, right. But I think, again, it's totally important, of course, to take in authors' feedback. It's their work, right? So you want to make sure that you are able to address their feedback the best possible we can, and to accommodate what the changes they want, right? Totally, in terms of doing that. But yeah, it's tough. Every press is a little bit different, in terms of that. But we all strive to really make sure that the publication is cohesive, right? The cover fits, the interior is combed through, it goes through editing, proofreading, all of that. Some presses maybe don't have the same process from end to end in terms of you know publication. Even lit magazine journals, everyone's process is a little bit different. There are, of course, as I mentioned, similarities across lit mag journal teams, press teams, in terms of what work needs to be done, of course, right? But the guidelines, again, are different across presses, as you may see here, right? Even if you listen back to the past two episodes, right, you'll notice, right, the guidelines are different for the presses, right? So you don't want to just keep sending the same manuscript to each press, right? Because it's going to be declining, because each there's a because each press has different guidelines, right? Different page amounts, different word counts, different requirements, of what to put in your submission manuscript files, right? And yeah, so you don't want to just keep sending the same file to every single press, right? You come into contact with a window, because the guidelines and things are very, some have very specific guidelines, and they will only review it if you meet those guidelines, and the requirements. And some presses and lit magazine journals are, maybe a bit lenient on their guidelines, but in terms of contests and things that involve anything in terms of royalties or award amounts and stuff, usually it is very, very strict, right? Totally, we are like that too. So yeah, we want to make the review process as fair as possible. So only those that, meet the guidelines, of course should move forward, right? And, to fit the series, right? To make it cohesive as possible. So yeah, it says, but be sure you submit the correct manuscript. Again, if they, if you submit another one, right, then it would be hard for them to edit it again. It says, do not request to make revisions to the manuscript after they've accepted it. It says if they send an acceptance, it is, for the manuscript they received, not for a revised story. And then it says, you know, they read the manuscript at the time of submission, and edit the manuscript after acceptance, and proofread the files once they're formatted and ready for publication. They do not have the time, nor they would like to repeat those steps. So, if you send them the wrong version of your manuscript or request to make changes, to the story after acceptance, there's a strong likelihood it will be pulled from publication and your contract will be canceled or terminated, right? So they are a small press, right? 2 to 4 people will be involved, it says, in the publication of the book. Each of those people have other projects, jobs, and obligations, of course. And yeah, so as I mentioned, right, resources and budget are limited. Yeah. And they do the best to promote, publication through social media, their site, and try to answer emails within 24 hours. And they strive to pay authors on time always. So yeah, and then it says, when they are open, this is what they're looking for. So horror, extreme horror, dark fiction, sleaze, and exploitation. It says if you are unsure whether your book is right for Grindhouse Press, again, you have to take some time to familiarize yourselves with their catalog. They do not put a limit on content, and they're open to reading horror from any subgenre. As their name suggests, they're most interested in the written version of the Grindhouse film genre. And no, not the Grindhouse films from Quentin Tarantino and Robert Rodriguez, although they're good examples. We're looking for content that could remind our readers of the Grindhouse films of the 60s and 70s and the video nasties of the 80s. So, yeah, I don't know how many of you guys have seen that film, Grindhouse. If you've never seen it, totally check it out sometime. It's been a while since I saw that. I saw that movie when I was super young, guys, absolutely, like very, very young. And I remember, yeah, it was a 2007 movie, right? So basically, if you've never seen the film, it's a double feature film, right? So two in one, and so it consisted of, I think, Planet Terror and then Death Proof, if I recall. I don't really remember like the Death Proof. I think I remember Planet Terror more so. But yeah, look up the trailer, Grindhouse, 2007 sometime, or, if you've never watched, those films. I'm sure most are aware of that one, or if you're, but if you're really into, that genre. But yeah, I was mentioning on that past podcast episode, right, some horror movies at the very end that I was, watched over the years and stuff. I think two I forgot was like Quarantine, the Quarantine series, right? So from 2008 and 2011. There was a part two, and then they did other ones, but those were really, I didn't really enjoy those at all. And then the Spanish version 2007, which was REC, which was, it was basically like the equivalent of, the 2008, version, right? And the, yeah, so of Quarantine. Yeah, so those were interesting. I think one of my all-time favorites, in terms of horror, would have to be the Cube series. If you never seen the Cube series, totally check it out. Yeah, it was, a Canadian science fiction horror film series. One of my all-time faves. I didn't like the most, recent one they did. There was one that came out in, a couple of years ago. I didn't really like it. But I think I only liked the 1997 Cube and then the 2002 Cube, Hypercube. The other ones I didn't really like, yeah. So watch those, the Cube series, if you never have. It's a pretty interesting. I don't like overly graphic horror sometimes, but I've totally seen some films. Sometimes you have to like turn away for some scenes, right? Like I mentioned, Saw and the Texas Chainsaw. Oh, those are like really like some scenes are just like really them. But yeah, a lot of the older style horror films, I definitely, and sci-fi, right? I totally grew up watching those. Yeah. So yeah, if you're someone who likes, this what they're describing here, right? And I'll show you some of their titles too, and the pages they have. So yeah, but yeah, so if you're into horror, right, the Grindhouse Press might be for you. For your manuscript, maybe you have to really look at their catalog, though. Maybe pick up a couple of publications, right, to get a feel or sense of what they're looking for, as always. So it says here they do not want co-authored books, right? And yeah. So yeah, if you are looking for like co-authored places, Go City Press, right? I showed you in the past episode, they do have some calls, right? That permit co-authored works at Go City. So you can look back at that episode if you're curious. But yeah, some places do, some places don't. So yeah, at Grindhouse Press, it says do not submit co-authored books, simultaneous submissions, previously published works, or incomplete manuscripts. Don't submit those. It says it should go without saying they are a horror press, but they are not interested in nonfiction, anthologies, fantasy collections, second person point of view, science fiction, poetry, young adult short story series, art books, bizarro or experimental fiction. It says they please do not send historical horror, vampire, serial killers, killer clowns, or zombie manuscripts. If you send anything from the previous list, it will be deleted without response. So yeah, what they're looking for is very specific. Nothing in that realm. And I totally though I grew up watching a bunch of zombie movies though, guys. And I think the longest series I ever watched in terms of like the horror genre, right, is I'm sure you guys are all aware of the Walking Dead TWD series, right? And most recently, I've been like catching up to the Daryl Dixon spinoff, right? But yeah, that was one I watched, all the way through, like all the spinoffs. I haven't seen the all the way through the Maggie spinoff, yeah, that one at all. But yeah, very 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 long running series. Absolutely, it was one I followed for a long. But yeah, you don't want to submit anything like that to them, right? Nothing in terms of historical horror, vampires, serial killers, killer clowns, or zombie manuscripts. If you send that to them, it's gonna be deleted, right? And this isn't a poetry focused press or anything like that, right? They're not looking for that, right? So just keep that in mind. I just wanted to show an example of a press that focuses on horror, and it's not necessarily about focusing on poetry at all, right? So yeah, so some presses focus on poetry, like Ghost City, or focus on multiple types of categories, or some are very specific like Grindhouse Press. So yeah, it says your submission should be 30,000 plus words, the ideal range between 30 to 60,000 words. If your manuscript is under 30,000 words or over 100,000 words, it will also be rejected. It says you have to send a brief synopsis, 150 words or less, in the body of your email with an explanation as to why you've chosen to submit to Grindhouse Press. There are no right or wrong answers for that. And yeah, it says attach your manuscript to the email as a Word document only, double spaced, Times New Roman 12 point, and send your submissions to, they have their email address there, right? And, you have to put the submission title of your novel and then the author name. So yeah. Yeah, so basically I just wanted to give you guys, overview of the guidelines of a press that, is outside of, the poetry realm and some of the other ones they mentioned, right, that they don't, aren't looking for. There are totally, some horror focused poetry presses too out there, and lit magazine journals, and maybe I'll share a couple more if I have time. If not, a good place to look is Chill Subs. They have a filtering for that and stuff, and I'm sure you even in general searches you can come across that. But I showed on this podcast, in a couple episodes, how to just find more calls, right, for specific things you're looking for, even, right. But yeah. So they have their terms here, right? So, I like that they clearly put their royalty split on here. Not all presses do that, have you seen? So I like that they're very transparent about like the process that happens, right? There's editing afterwards. They, do all that, and yeah. Yeah, so they do a 50-50 royalty split. And some presses I've seen do that. I've heard, I think I mentioned this podcast, a few others that I mentioned, but not all. Some have different royalty, agreements and terms, and some presses don't give royalties. Again, some do, again, in the form of payment, just copies, right, or different things. So yeah, so it says authors retain all rights and royalties for digital, They will format all the author's files and walk through them through the publishing process. If they would like their Grindhouse title available as an ebook, limited editions, hardcovers, audio, film, and foreign translations. So they do give 5 contributor copies too, and the author can purchase unlimited additional copies at cost plus shipping. So that's nice. They do a 50-50 royalty split, on English language paperbacks. And, authors retain all rights and royalties for digital and, 5 contributor copies. I think that's nice. So, every press is a little bit different, set up like that, right? In terms of what the author receives, if anything, or, you know, and like Ghost City, right, had those donation buttons too, for authors. And then they mentioned they do have like royalties. Bottle Cap Press, I mentioned earlier in this podcast, right? I believe they do, again, they have a royalty split. I think it's also 50-50, but I could be wrong. Again, I didn't see those terms on some of the sites I've come across with presses in terms of like what that entails. But typically, whenever you sign a contract with a press, as a, someone who has an accepted manuscript, right, they will, of course, specify that in the agreement, right? So you just want to read carefully, right, and ask questions, on your contractual agreements and stuff. Yeah, so they're a very small publisher again, right? They publish at least 6 books a year. I think Duotrope said sometimes a little bit more, but 6 books a year it looks like. And yeah, in other words, it says the likelihood of your book being accepted is very slim. They try to respond within 3 months after the submission has been received. Due to the high volume of submissions, they may not be able to respond to all of them. If you do not hear from them within 3 months, your manuscript has been rejected. If you do receive a rejection, it will be a standard form. They will not critique your manuscript. So yeah, that's understandable. Not all places give a critique or feedback on the manuscript, especially with the volume submissions. I typically like to send a letter back to, and we don't do novels, right, at the press I run or anything like that to date. We focus on poetry at Dippity predominantly. But yeah, I think, it's nice to get a decision letter, right, on your submission, though, absolutely. But yeah, it's hard sometimes. Presses are sometimes juggling with hundreds of submissions, maybe even thousands. So yeah. But that's why I think submission management systems. Not every press or lit mag journal has them again, but it helps you sort of do that, and you can do bulk actions and things like that, and you can really organize things and have your templates of your decisions all set up, right? So yeah, that's why I really like Subfolio. And yeah. And yeah, so anyways, again, this is a basically Grindhouse Press. So I'm trying to think of anything else. So I guess I'll show you maybe their authors and books section because it's pretty cool. So yeah, again, their titles are available online as paperbacks in a variety of ebook formats. They can be purchased, through Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Powell's, or wherever books are sold. They say ask for them at your local bookstore. Select titles are available as audiobooks from Amazon, Audible, and iTunes. Some of the authors that they publish, right, have their own online stores where you can purchase signed copies or books directly from them. So you can see here they have the books here, which is pretty interesting, right? I like looking at the covers and the titles. Yeah, so you can check out more of this. Yeah, there's some definitely interesting titles here, and yeah, the cover art is pretty cool. So some authors have multiple works, it looks like, in the toggle here, and some don't. So yeah, there's yeah, I'm just scrolling through for you guys so you can see. And yeah, so these are pretty neat. Yeah, I see it on TV. Oh gosh, that one looks interesting, for sure. Oh, this one, yeah, the bat on the cover. There's one, and yeah. So yeah, you definitely have to, if you're ever going to submit to a press, whether it be, a poetry press or not, or if it's just a press, focusing on novels or stories, right? You want to always pick up some examples, they published in the past, so you get an idea of what they're looking for. So yeah, if you're into horror, right, this would be, I think, for you, right? Yeah. So I won't go through all of them, but you can see they have a very organized page, right? All the authors are listed out there, and the titles, right? So yeah, that's great. And they link out, you saw, right, the authors, where you can pick up all the titles and, read more about the authors, right? So yeah, they have their contact page, and yeah, that's basically it. So it's pretty cool. So yeah, I think that's it. So I think the only thing is, if you have like 100 titles or several hundred titles, I think over time it's good to have maybe a search on a site or something, or but yeah, just to minimize, I think, scrolling and toggling, or things like that back and forth. But yeah, overall, it's a very clear, right? I think Grindhouse Press, has a very clear, guidelines, submission guidelines, very thorough, so others know what to expect, in terms of, like, before and after, the whole process. And yeah, so you just always want to read guidelines very carefully. And yeah, so just wanted to share one out there. Lit Mag Journals Press is right. It's not always, when you hear that, right, it's not always about poetry. That's what I wanted to share. So some presses do focus on poetry collections, chapbooks, right? And some presses, again, they are more novel focused, right? Or do a mixture of publications, right? So you really have to, if you're looking for something very specific, totally, you're bound to find, again, a press or lit mag journal tied to something you really love. Again, if you are someone who's a fan of horror, or horror stories, and very long stories, or things like that, that's awesome. You're bound to find some more presses. Grindhouse isn't the only one out there, but I was seeing some comments about it, so I was like, I gotta check out Grindhouse Press to see what it's about. Yeah. So that's basically it. I was checking out their announcement section. They had some recommendation reads and stuff, and they celebrate book launches totally, so you can see that they've been active, right? This was last posted, this month, right? Yeah, so very cool press, very cool covers, and yeah, and titles. So I'm gonna have to check out some of those sometime myself a bit closer. I'm not, a novel writer per se, but I know some are out there. So I wanted to find one example for you guys, of a place that doesn't just focus on poetry. Because yeah, there are a lot of really cool, small presses, and even there are some other, various size presses that do a really awesome job. So a lot of said they've had positive experiences. It looks like Grindhouse Press to date, as of to date. So I think that's really cool. Yeah. um Halloween's coming up here, so definitely pick up some of these, if you're in for a eerie, horror read or something. I grew up reading, I mentioned on this podcast, right, Goosebumps, and a couple others. I wasn't like huge on reading horror books, I would say, but more so I watched, over the years, like most, like, horror films and stuff with some popcorn. Some totally jump you sometimes, right? The scenes, like, oh, but yeah. Anyways, yeah, the Grindhouse Press has published a lot of really cool titles. Even if you go out on, I think Goodreads, right? You'll find a lot of really interesting titles that they have. Let me go there for you guys. So, the thing about, if you don't publish your, as a publisher, right? So if you don't have your series distribute outside of the website, for a press, right? Then it doesn't generate, right, these Goodreads listings, right? Let's say, it's not distributed through Amazon, or even as an ebook, right, digitally, there, through the ebook Kindles, right? Then it doesn't have a Goodreads listing. And others typically like to rate and review books they read, right? So you can see here, right, it says Kindle edition, paperback, Kindle edition, paperback. And sometimes Goodreads doesn't have, sometimes listing corrections need to be made too. So sometimes I've had to do that too, just like in terms of like, let's say you changed a cover design, or you changed something about a title and resubmitted it or something, right? Then sometimes the listing has to be, you have to maybe put a ticket in or something for minor changes like that. They can't, of course, pull um you know listings out there. Sometimes there's been like duplicate, I think, listings too or something, I don't know. But anyways, yeah. So yeah, you can see they have paperback. These are Grindhouse Press titles. It looks like, yeah, some of these, right, you saw from the other page. So yeah, and then there you can see there are ratings totally on their books here, right? A lot of ratings. So very cool. You can see, right? It's showing some of these, right? Now, yeah. So you can see here, right? So they have a lot of very cool titles. So I think all these are Grindhouse Press titles. Sometimes I've had in my search results though on Goodreads, right? There've been a couple other books that were pulled in from other places that were showing up, because I think for some authors, right? Some authors with identical names. Sometimes the Goodreads listing pulls that in, and it confuses the system or something. I've seen things like that too. But I was just mentioning that. Anyways, I didn't see that here, but I was just showing you. So yeah, it's a good idea. This is just an example, right? So if you do end up distributing, start a press, or even, a lit mag journal, right? And you end up distributing your series outside of just your site, right? And you do listings with online bookstores, or even, digitalization or Kindle editions of a publication, right? It, a lot still use Goodreads to date, and some I've been longtime fans of Goodreads. I think Goodreads is great, very helpful, right? You can read ratings of books and things like that. Not every book's going to obviously get a 5-star rating, right? I've seen that even with the series we have. We got a 1 star the other day. I was like, yeah, it's to be expected, right? Myself, as whenever you publish work, you have to just be aware, right? Whether it be your work or as a press, you're publishing work, right? It's bound to happen, right? Others, or everyone, responds differently to a work that they read. Not everyone's going to like it. Not everyone's going to have the same exact rating. Some may really love it collectively, but not every single person that comes in contact with your work. So again, I shared in this podcast how to handle negative feedback or ratings, and don't let it get to you. If you stand by your work, you feel it's awesome and you love it, that's really all that matters. Others are always going to rate things and put reviews on things. Presses, lit max journals get ratings, and there's that, chill subs, right? Review rating feature now, right? And yeah, even other places online I showed you, right? On forums and things like that, boards, right? Others are discussing presses, lit max journals, and experiences with them. So not everyone has the same exact experience too in that terms. But when in terms of books, I'm saying, publications and, lit mags and, even chapbooks, right? Others are going to have, mixed reviews, and poetry collections and things like that. Totally. And novels especially, right? So, I was looking through the Grindhouse Press ratings, and you can see, mixed there. Yeah. So yeah, just to be expected. So if you're going to rent a press, just note that you're not always going to have, 5-star glowing ratings on every single thing. Like, but most important thing is, right, that you follow through with what you say in your contractual agreement, right? Paying authors on time, getting back to them in appropriate time frame, right, as specified, being very clear and communicative, again, as I mentioned, right? So yeah, I just wanted to show you an example of a couple different presses out there. The past two were more so poetry focused, right? Bottle Cap Press and Ghost City. But yeah, Ghost City does a couple other, publications too, and yeah, in terms of or series, I mean, and yeah, they've done like anthologies too. So yeah, Grindhouse Press is very cool. They have some cool book publications. Again, you just want to read through their guidelines again. I don't read every single guideline typically, so you always want to double check yourself. I just try to sometimes point out some of the, things that stand out to me when I'm just sharing, So yeah, this is Grindhouse Press, guys. So check it out. Halloween's coming up. I don't know if you guys celebrate Halloween still, or have a sweet tooth for some candy, but I don't really celebrate it as much anymore. I mean, totally, I watch some flicks for fun and when I was younger, we used to decorate our, the house I grew up in a little bit more so. And, around the surrounding area where I grew up, they were like, I don't know if they were always competing or what, but there were some really, some people go all out. This is the additional bonus of me just talking, by the way. So you can, if you want to drop off, totally feel free to. But, right. But yeah, there's some that go all out for Halloween in terms of decorations, from top to bottom, their whole house, and it's very spooky. Totally, that's always LOL. I've never really been in one of those haunted house, pop up events or anything like that. I think been around though, like one of those fun house mirrors in the past and things like that. I've seen those, where it distorts and things like that. But yeah, yeah, so totally, some things absolutely I feel like we all have things that creep us out, I think, a little bit, right? Some people aren't really creeped out or scared by some things in terms of the horror realm or films, but I think absolutely there are some things that really like eek, or that we come into contact with for sure, I think, yeah. So yeah, spiders freak me out for sure, right? For sure. There was some large spiders when I moved out to Nevada here that I saw. I was like climbing up the curtain. I was like, oh my God, that's like a giant spider, like it reminded me of like eight-legged freaks, right? Not that big, but you know what I'm saying. Just joking. But yeah, eight-legged freaks. That was always there's some fun horror movies, right? Eight-legged freaks. I don't know if you guys ever saw that, right? That movie was so LOL. It's I always enjoyed that one. I think it was really fun. Yeah, and there was that was a 2002 movie if you've never seen it. So there's some movies that are more comical in nature, totally, that don't really scare you but are mostly fun. I would say I'm a huge fan of Tremors. That series. The and the yeah, so I've seen all the Tremors films. That's probably one of my all-time favorite monster horror film series. If you've never seen it. So, yeah. So there's Tremors, the 1990, right? And then there was like the other ones, right? The Tremor franchise is very very fun, right? The 1996 Tremors 2 Aftershocks, and then I saw Tremors 3's Back to Perfection 2001, Tremors 4 The Legend Begins 2004, and yeah. And then after that, I didn't really like, the other ones, that happened after that, right? Tremor 5 and the other ones, I didn't really like those. I mostly like the early Tremor films, right? The first four were okay. First three were probably my fave, absolutely. So yeah, if you like monster horror films, or if you've never seen Tremors, I'm sure most have, but if you've never seen it, watch the first couple. Those are my faves. I think it was very unique, right? And it takes place right in the fictional desert town Perfection, Nevada, right? So I made a joke about that somewhere, I think, with a through Dippity. But yeah, I'm in Nevada, so currently, but I'm not, in the middle of nowhere in the desert or anything like that. Just basically, yeah. Um, yeah, but yeah, so check out, just give movie recs from time to time. But again, Grindhouse Press isn't looking for, based on their guidelines, right, anything very obvious or just like, like as they mentioned, right, they don't want to see killer clowns or, vampires. They don't want to see poetry, things like that, right? They're very focused on, very specific on what they're looking for their, the series and the book series they do. And yeah, so grab some of these books, absolutely, very cool. Read some of the ratings even, I think, if you're curious. But I think if a title interests you, don't necessarily always pay attention to the ratings because you may enjoy it, certainly. Same thing about movies, right? When we see a movie and we see a bunch of negative reviews, we're like, oh, this is probably going to be pretty, not good. But no, everyone has, different, different when you're reading a book, film, or things, you may not always, agree with the ratings and stuff. Sometimes you may actually enjoy a book or film, right? Not just I'm talking about horror realm, but there's some low budget horror films that I actually loved, growing up that I used to rewatch and things like that. Even sci-fi, right, or films in general, low budget ones, and they're actually pretty fun. They're not, it's not like some of the low budget horror films sometimes are better than some of the movies right out there that they have several millions behind, right? So yeah, just that they throw hundreds upon hundreds of millions of dollars into, a franchise, right? Some of the smaller low budget movies are absolutely some fun to watch, right? I think I was always a fan of also Cloverfield, right? That film series, and yeah, most recently I saw Dangerous Animals to 2025. It's a shark flick. It was quite sad and dark for most of it, but very interesting. I think it was not a bad shark film, if you're into that. But yeah. And then I also saw Fear Below 2025. I think Dangerous Animals was a bit better 2025 than Fear Below. Yeah. So yeah, just some movie racks, So yeah, I hope you guys have a great upcoming Halloween in October. I'm gonna might do a couple more episodes, not horror related, obviously not all. Maybe share some resources and additional coverage of some lit mags and journals out there. Try to fit in a couple more episodes before October, because I definitely will at some point in time this year drop off and maybe do some text based articles and stuff for you guys. Yeah, totally. So bye guys. Yeah, check out Grindhouse Press. Yeah. P.S. guys, so just on Chill Subs, just want to show you their filtering here. They updated the browse feature again. You may notice that, if you've watched earlier episodes of this podcast. But so if we go here, you can see they have genre, right? And essentials, right? How it's submitted, right? So yeah, one day they'll add Subfolio, I'm sure. We use Subfolio at the Lit Mag Drone Press I run, but for right now we choose other. But yeah. And then so genre, right? So we go here, you can see, right, you can toggle to fiction, nonfiction, poetry, multimedia, which is really nice. And then what you can do here, right? Okay. And then you can see here, you can choose book size, right? Novel, collection, chapbook, novella, right? And then we have horror, right? So you can see here, right? If we toggle horror, and then we could do novel, fiction, right? And yeah, and then it'll show you, right, 6 presses, right, that sort of may meet what you're looking for then in terms of your selections. And now you have to double check, of course, right? You always want to double check whenever you're searching for something, but for the most part, Chill Subs is pretty accurate with all the filtering and really helpful, to discover more. Absolutely, this looks cool. Dark Waters podcast. It's a dark fiction podcast, and yeah, so yeah, so that's cool, And there are plenty of other ones out there. There's no means by just 6 presses. Not every press, again, as I showed you, right, is listed out on here, right? In terms of horror or lit mags and journals, even, right? I'm toggled on presses right now. So yeah. And they have, multimedia, and so we could uncheck that, and then it'll update, right? But yeah, so by no means, that's all the presses out there that focused on horror, right? There's tons of magazines and lit mags also that do horror publications too. And yeah, so a lot of really awesome presses out there. Some of, oh, there's Dippity, right? There we are, right? So, ha ha ha. Yeah, so, a lot of really stellar presses out there for sure. You just got to do some digging, right? Absolutely. To find what you're looking for, right? The filtering on Chill Subs really helps. Not every press, again, or even Lit Mag or Journal is on here to date, but there are a lot, so, they have a way to make suggestions to, do that and stuff. So it's very great. And yeah, there's a, contest section, all of that. So yeah, you can watch back the Chill Subs episode. And the Grindhouse Press, just, it helps to look at press's social media, if they are on, there, and just to see. So you can see they have some pretty fun posts from time to time, right? So I don't know if you guys dress up for Halloween, but yeah, I haven't in quite some time. Some of the first ever costumes I did as a kid, I was like, I think SpongeBob SquarePants with a backpack and a shirt or something. And then, my earliest costume, though, my first ever, I think, as a kid, I had my hair out, out of braids. I didn't, and it's very rare when I have my hair out of braids. I only do it for like special occasions, or things like that from time to time. But yeah, and my mom, helped me with my witch costume. I had like a black hat, and she put like rosy, not, I had like, makeup on my cheeks, right? And I had, my Halloween bucket. So I was like, one of my first ever costumes as a witch. And then at school, we had like a dress up stuff, right? So I was like SpongeBob SquarePants. And then in, I think it was middle school. I think so, or it could have been ninth grade, or I think middle school. I dressed up as one of those ghosts with where you can't see the face, right? It's like a netted black net, and it's like a red hat with like almost like you can, it's very creepy, so no one can see your face or they don't know who you are. And then it was like a purple wizard gown, so it actually merged very well. It was really funny, but it was like a red hat, very creepy, with a mesh black in front of it, and then a purple, almost like a wizard gown. Some odd choice of costume. I did become a finalist in one of the school's costume contests. They had me go on stage. I was a twister board for that one. I had a twister costume, and then the twister board on top of my head. You've seen those, right? Others were totally flicking the hat from time to time, trying to make it spin, but it actually didn't spin very well. So that twister board costume was so LOL. But it was fun nevertheless. Yeah, I don't really dress up as much anymore, but I do have fun. I used to do that a lot more, I think, and get into like the decorations and preparing and handing out candy. I can't really do that anymore, but yeah, definitely a fan of some classic horror movies out there for sure. But yeah, again, with Grindhouse Press, they're not looking for, obviously most presses and lit magazine journals, they don't want to be sent something on the obvious side. So yeah, totally read some of the books and novels, pick up some that interest you. If you're thinking about submitting, if you have a novel manuscript or something, just make sure it fits what they're looking for by reading the guidelines a couple times, not just me reading it. Maybe it helped you, me reading it over, and that's cool if it did, but you always want to read it over again. Sometimes I miss things when I'm reading too, or just point out a couple things. So don't always go off of what I say. And sometimes things change with presses, right? Their structure, things like that. So the one comment I will have additional on Grindhouse Press. So, they have their contact form here, but I didn't really see their masthead info here, or anything like that. And maybe it's on social media or somewhere else. I don't know, but I haven't seen their masthead info. That's the only thing I like reading about who runs the press and, their bios and stuff from time to time. But nevertheless, they're, just looking online, and, they published a lot of great work. There seemed to be a lot of positive comments, as of 2025 on Grindhouse Press. So I wanted to take the time to share it because, and it's we're sort of in the Halloween realm coming up here. So just wanted to give a suggestion. There was another press or lit mag, I can't remember, that I came across. Maybe I'll share with you guys. If not, maybe some time down the road. Doesn't just have to be because of Halloween season. I could share it maybe later. But yeah, so yeah, wishing you guys a happy upcoming Halloween. I know it's very early, we're not in October quite yet, but we're getting there. So I'm gonna try and fit in just a few more episodes, and then maybe do the text-based extension of the series sometime, maybe a bit later, because I do run a lit mag drone press myself, right? So I have to break from time to time and do these when I can. If any of these episodes helped you, again, feel free to drop a comment, thumbs up, or heart, whichever platform you're on. I think some platforms don't have that option, but some do. So totally, yeah. So check out Grindhouse Press. Yeah, they've been around for 15 years, so it's pretty cool. Since 2010. And yeah, my only comments, about the site. This is a WordPress based site. You may not be able to see at the bottom, but it states that. And yeah, so my only comments would be it'd be nice to have a search over the authors and books section, or maybe I think it helps when instead of having to scroll sometimes. But as long as you can find everything, the authors, the books, that's great. And yeah, I'm not sure where they're based, exactly like which city or state, or but yeah. Anyways, still really cool. I've heard, I was reading a little bit further on comments that it's pretty on the, I don't know if it's true or not, on the dark side, like of dark horror. So, if you're really not interested in that, then maybe don't. Of course, always read, samples of, you can get like Kindle, right? Samples of books and stuff, but usually don't get that many pages with that. But they do Kindle versions again of publications and ebooks. It looks like I was checking out on, online bookstores and Amazon. And it's those are inexpensive to pick up, right? So, a couple bucks. So if you can't pick up, physical paperback books, that's still okay. It helps to read though before, you're gonna submit to a place, when they're open again. And yeah, I really love that they, appear to do audio books, audio series, with their authors too, which is really cool. I think it's again really nice that you can hear, others' voices or have, an audio version, right? And yeah, very, very awesome again. So that's Grindhouse Press, yeah.